Hey, everyone. You're listening to the My Aggie Nation podcast. I'm Alex Miller with the Eagle, joined by Travis Brown of the Eagle. Travis, how you doing today?
Hey, hey, Alex. Hey, hey, we're the Eagles.
Some might say. There's no A&M football game this week, but we're still talking little Aggie football as the Aggies await their bowl destination, of course, coming off kind of a disappointing, bitter loss for the Aggies that capped the regular season against LSU last week. One they lost there in the final minute of the game. You know, Travis, now that we've had a few days removed from the end of the regular season, what do you just kind of make of the year that A&M had? A lot of high expectations coming in, and certainly didn't play out the way A&M probably hoped it would.
Yeah, I mean, I think ending with that loss at LSU did kind of make it a disappointing that finish. That was a game that they needed to have pulled in, but I think that the expectations that A&M and the fans might have had before the season started were needed to be reevaluated a little bit after Haynes King went down with injury, and then once it was obvious that the offensive line needed a little bit of time to gain some continuity. It wasn't going to be that make a push for the playoff type team that maybe they thought they could have with Haynes King and a little bit more of a cohesive offensive line. But that being said, probably should have won that game at LSU. There's no doubt about that, and it probably hurt their chances for a more top tier bowl game that they wanted. There still is a chance that they could go to Florida. They haven't been to the Outback Bowl yet, and that's a part of that kind of group of seven bowls that the SEC picks for teams. So that might be your best case scenario. But then there's also the worst case scenario in play that it could be a third Texas Bowl in 6 years for the A&M. They could also go somewhere, but you're kind of they kind of left them in that wide open space of it could be anything now. So it'll be interesting to see this Sunday where they get sent.
As much as it's going to be interesting to see where A&M plays, it'll be interesting to see who might suit up for the Aggies.
Mhm.
When you look at guys, A&M's got a number of guys that will probably enter the NFL draft as underclassmen and could potentially opt out in a game that is seemingly meaningless in the grand scheme of things, not really playing for anything that's too serious. Of course, A&M defensive end DeMarvin Leal announced that he will be entering the draft earlier this week. Travis, he's just the first of maybe quite a few that could forego their final year at A&M. Who are some other guys that you kind of jot down as a list of names to watch and see if and when they do declare for the draft?
Well, as far as just seniors go, you're going to lose Jameer Johnson. You're going to lose Jaden Peavy, Michael Clemens, Aaron Hansford, Brian George, Leon O'Neal, and Keldrick Harper. I know there is some COVID year issues there, maybe some medical red shirt issues in there, but generally speaking, those are your seniors. Kenyon Green is probably the next that's going to declare for the NFL draft. He's a guy that's being ranked in the first round of a lot of mock drafts right now, as is DeMarvin Leal. So those are the two that you would expect would go. The ones that would be on the bubble probably in that scenario would be somebody like Isaiah Spiller, or maybe Damoni Richardson. But Damoni Richardson is an interesting. We'll start with him. He's an interesting one because he's actually done a lot and done pretty well on the NIL front. I think he was actually one of the first A&M players to announce that they had some kind of NIL deal early in the process, and so it'll be interesting to see how that factors into seeing if guys will stay where they can actually make a little money, put a little few more stats up on the board. I could see him as a guy that maybe would stick around. Isaiah Spiller is always a little bit of a question mark because he didn't necessarily have his best year this year compared to some of the years past. But when you're a running back, you only have so many hits in you before your career is kind of done, and I think that there's a lot of running backs who try to go ahead and make that jump and make some money before they run out of time and run out of gas on their legs. So I could see Isaiah Spiller as a guy that would go. Now, the question is, and this is going to be the case from here on out, is if these guys play in the bowl game. We actually don't even know if DeMarvin Leal has a plan to go ahead and play in the bowl game. He just announced that he is going to forego his senior season. So that'll definitely be a question that we'll bring up to Jimbo Fisher when we talk to him this Sunday after the bowl announcement. But if you're asking me as far as guys who probably won't be coming back, I would put it at the probably for sure's of the juniors that are eligible would be DeMarvin Leal, Kenyon Green, and probably Isaiah Spiller. The other guys would be some bubble guys for me. Oh, I forgot to mention Tyree Johnson as one of the seniors too in that group. So yeah, that's probably what we're looking at there. What do you think? When you kind of look at? I think we can all agree that Kenyon Green and then DeMarvin Leal were the two guys, their first round projections. But when you look at some of those bubble guys like Isaiah Spiller, like Jaden Weimer, like Anaya Smith, Damoni Richardson, is there any of those that you actually see go ahead and dropping off before that senior season?
Yeah, I'm kind of expecting Isaiah Spiller to probably leave, and same with Jalen Watermeyer. Even though Jalen, didn't have the greatest season. I mean, he had a great first 2 years at A&M. He's definitely proven what he's capable of doing, and you kind of wonder what might have happened had Haynes Kings been able to play throughout the season. Zach Calzada, of course, did get better as the year went on, and there were times that Jalen Watermeyer just straight up dropped some passes that probably should have been
He
caught.
led the team in drops, and I
Right.
believe he might have led the SEC in drops.
So, but regardless of those points, I still think that he's probably a guy that enters the draft or tests the waters at least. Anaya Smith and Damoni Richardson are interesting. They're guys that if they went, I think would probably maybe just be third day guys, rounds 4 to 7. Um, I think that those are two that you'd probably expect to return. And if they did, that'd be huge for A&M, especially Anaya Smith, how valuable he is to that offense and on special teams as well.
Mhm.
Although, as we've seen, Moose Muhammad has been coming along the last couple games. Certainly has a bright future potentially at wide receiver for A&M. But yeah, I would say the four, and then probably those other two, Anaya Smith and Damani Richardson. Those are probably two that I'm watching, but I would probably lean toward they'll be coming back for a fourth season.
Yeah, for sure. So I know I kind of dropped in the bowl games there. What is some bowl situations that you think would work best for A&M?
Yeah, Citrus Bowl is out of the question now for sure with that fourth loss. It looks like Kentucky's probably going to get a chance to do that, and deservingly so. They've had a great season at 9-3. From there, like you said, it's just kind of depends on where things fall in line with what the SEC wants. I think the three that you're looking at is probably the Gator Bowl, the Outback Bowl, and maybe the Texas Bowl, just because of proximity. I think you can always count that one in simply just because it's A&M and it's Houston. The Outback Bowl, of course, is the one that A&M hasn't been to, and so that would lead one to believe that the Aggies probably have a chance to go there. Just kind of looking at the standings of things, if I can pull it up real quick, you know, A&M's kind of in there on the same tier as in Arkansas. Mississippi State 7-5, but A&M's probably going to get a nod over them. So it's probably just depending on where the league wants to send A&M versus Arkansas. Um, and of course, Arkansas hasn't made a bowl game in quite a while, having a few rough years. They probably would love to go to a Florida Bowl themselves. So I'm probably leaning toward probably the Gator Bowl, which could be a matchup against Clemson. Pitt and Wake Forest are playing this weekend, and from what I've read online, it seems like the loser of that game, well, the winner is going to go to a New Year's Six Bowl, of course, and then the loser's going to go to a bowl game ahead of the Gator Bowl in the ACC's pecking order, which would leave Clemson there in that third spot. And then if you go to the Outback Bowl, it's against a Big Ten team. You could see a team like Wisconsin, maybe in Iowa potentially, which would be a really good game for the Aggies. I don't think A&M's played a Big Ten team in a bowl game yet since they've been in the SEC, which is kind of interesting given the number of ties that the SEC has against Big Ten teams. But a lot of ACC games, a lot of Big
Mm.
12 games. But yeah, I would say Outback and Gator as I kind of stumble over myself talking about this.
Yeah, and I would just pull up the latest ESPN projections, and they actually have Gator and their two pickers, Gator and Citrus, which I don't see how quite they have the Citrus still in play. But you kind of look and kind of one of the threads that you typically can kind of see with the SEC is a lot of times, like you said, they'll try to put teams in places where either they haven't been yet or they haven't been necessarily in a long time. And in that regard, kind of almost all of those group of seven games are in play. If you want to look at Liberty or Music City or Duke's Mayo was pretty recently, but they haven't done the Liberty or the Music City recently, so also could be options in there. They did do Gator in Jimbo's first season. So that was relatively close. So we'll have to see on that regard, but should be a interesting Sunday where there's a lot of possibilities for A&M.
Yeah. One more question on football, Travis. As you look forward, do you feel like A&M is still kind of on the trajectory that they want to go down under Jimbo Fisher, or is it or where do you think the Aggies are heading in that regard? I mean, they're about to enter year 5 under Jimbo.
I think this next season will be a really pivotal one because I think all of the cards were set up for these last two seasons to be maybe one of the breakthroughs. And you can arguably say that last season, the 2020 season, was on par with that, making it to a New Year's Six Bowl and just being the first one left out of the college football playoff. I think this year was a disappointment, but you kind of have to factor in some injuries and things along that regard. I mean, what we also didn't even mention is that a wide receiving core that was pretty banged up and second string through most of the season. But you're going to replace a lot next season, like a lot, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't necessarily think that the expectations or the predictions are going to be quite as high next year, but this is going to be that proof in case of how well does A&M recruit, which of course they're on pace to have one of the best recruiting classes in school history, at number 3 right now, and according to 247 Sports .com's rankings, and how well some of those players can slot in right away, and what the depth looks like on this team, and to see if there's some people who can step up, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and kind of reload, not replace, on that side. So, yes, with a caveat, I think that there's still probably a little bit more optimism moving forward into next season than some of those 8-5 Kevin Sumlin teams. But I think that it'll be vital to see if this is a program that can start just reloading and not rebuilding, because indications are pointing that this could end up being a rebuilding year with how much they're losing.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. It is basketball season, believe it or not. And the Aggie basketball team, men's basketball team, I should say, already played 8 games, off to a 7-1 start. Travis, what do you think's been the biggest key to success for A&M early on in the season? Certainly had a great showing out of that tournament in Las Vegas.
I think that what you probably can say they're leaning the most on that's been really good is their defense, and especially their turnover defense. If you look at what Ken Palm has on there, they're actually 17th in the nation in steal percentage at 13.5 percent per game, and 32nd in non-steal turnovers. They turn the ball over a lot and they have a lot of speed. It's going to look different than a lot of A&M teams in the past 2 years because those have been slow it down, ball control, kind of, if you want to make a football reference, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of basketball, work deep into the shot clock. This is an offense that wants to get turnovers and move quickly, and score points in transition, and use the speed that they have. The other thing, and I've joked about it a lot of times, it's really kind of fascinating and probably a lot more fun to cover a basketball team that can actually stop and pull up on mid-range jumpers, and there's at least a little bit of expectation that it will go in, because especially last year's team that Buzz had, it was they were not shooters. They did not have the guys who had that capability, and they brought in a lot of guys that can do it, like Tyrese Radford. Andre Gordon has really stepped up. Marcus Williams can shoot the ball. Quentin Jackson has stepped up his game a little bit as far as the shooting goes, because Buzz Williams said he spent an inordinate amount of time over the summer just doing individual shooting practice with guys to kind of help bolster that shooting. But you look at what they've been able to do. They're using 11 guys, an 11-man rotation right now, and I think they are best suited to do kind of what they did against in some of those games, Maui, especially Notre Dame. Rotate those guys in a lot and put a lot of full court pressure on teams. Force them. They're already have shown that they're good at forcing turnovers and getting steals. Put that pressure on all the way full court, and have the guys that they can sub in and keep legs fresh and keep that pressure on throughout the game. If they're going to keep doing that 11-man rotation, I think that's a great option for them, and really capitalize on transition buckets, because too, when they get into SEC play, they don't really have the depth or the talent yet in the front court to combat really tall teams. And so just keeping them pressed up and letting them not necessarily get set in their half court sets might serve a good purpose for them.
And has been playing a lot of bye games per se against some of these smaller schools, but a couple of pretty solid wins over Butler and Notre Dame. When you look at the last two seasons, it seems like in non-conference, A&M's kind of been behind the eight ball, and they've had to play catch up when they got to SEC play. What do you think some of these early season wins can do for A&M, especially a team that's really trying to find its core and has really tried to come together with a lot of new pieces early on in the season?
Yeah, I think you made a good point there, that I mean, a lot of new guys coming in. And I think when you look at some of those really close games against in what should be guarantee games for their opponents, they struggled a little bit. I mean, you look at the double OT win over Abilene Christian, where they needed a Hassan Diarra three to at the buzzer to take it. I think that they've shown, especially in that New Orleans games, they've been able to kind of find their stride a little bit, and find some separation. They just have to play a full 40 minutes. That something Buzz kind of harped on after the last game, is that they're not going to be good enough to be able to just have a lull of 6 minutes in a game like they did against Wisconsin in that loss, and like they did at a time in New Orleans, and be able to win ball games. So I think that they are going to start to have some more challenges when they go play TCU in Houston on the December 11th, and then December 18th at Oregon State, are going to be two to really look at before they hit the ground running right after the new year and get right into conference play. Yeah, so there was some question about how improved this team was going to be when they first started out. But I think as things have started to mesh together, it's pretty obvious to see there's more athleticism, there's more shooting talent, there's better defenders on this team, and that should account for more wins this year than last year.
Yeah, obviously still pretty early in the season, but, based on what you've seen so far, do you see this team inching toward potentially competing for a postseason berth as the year goes on?
That's interesting. I'm looking at Ken Palm's projections right here, and they actually have them going 19-12 and just 8-10 in conference play. And if that's the case with the projections they've run, that's not going to be enough to push into the postseason. But I do think that they could catch some hot streaks. I think that they will win some games that people don't necessarily expect them to win. It's just if they can mitigate losing some of those that they should probably win. When you look at, they should beat teams like Georgia, like maybe South Carolina, Missouri. There's some games in there that they should win. And if they don't drop any of those and pull a few out of their hat, it could potentially be a team that's knocking at postseason play, whether that's NIT or NCAA tournament, it is to be said. But I think they do have the talent. It's just the consistency, if it's there, and not having lulls in games where they kind of go off book and get away from their really strong defensive play.
Well, A&M's other basketball team, the women, they have started off certainly pretty hot, 8-0 on the season. They went out to St. Thomas out in the Caribbean and won 3 games, but now they come back home. They got a big game this Sunday against number 14 Texas. Of course, it's Gary Blair's last season and going to be a big non-conference game. Of course, Gary facing off protege Vic Schaefer, who was the second in command under A&M's 2011 championship year. Should be a good game on Sunday at Reed Arena, and A&M women certainly positioning themselves to have another successful season. Well, Travis, we'll close with this. Who's going to be your 4 that you think make the playoff?
Oh, geez. That's a good call because that'll be coming up this Sunday. Let's go with Georgia, of course.
Okay.
I do think that Michigan will be in there. They'll win that Big Ten tournament. The one that I would like to see is then Cincinnati and Oklahoma State. I think that would be a lot of new faces in there, a lot of good matchups. I'd really enjoy that. I do think Georgia is going to win, which would push Alabama out. So then you have a question of if Notre Dame is able to sneak in there over a one-loss Oklahoma State, or if Oklahoma State and Notre Dame get in over Cincinnati. I don't know which one of those scenarios will happen, but I think the one that I would like to happen is Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State.
I'm with you. Those are my 4. I think it's Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Oklahoma State 3, and Cincinnati 4.
And
Group of 5.
And just for the sake,
finally
yeah,
getting
just
in
for the
there.
sake of not being exactly the same, I would actually have Cincinnati at 3 and Oklahoma State at 4.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in for another My Aggie Nation podcast. And be sure to check theeagle.com for all of our coverage on Texas A&M sports. We'll see you next week.